Welcome back to another journey. If you're new here, this channel takes you out of your own life and into someone else's. Completely. Not a lecture, not a summary, experience. The kind that starts the moment you close your eyes and doesn't let go until it's finished. And when you're ready, we begin. The first thing you notice is the smell, not the body. You have seen bodies before, enough of them that the sight no longer arrives with the force it once did. No longer lands in the stomach the way it did the first time. Standing in a parking garage in the rain at 26 years old, your hands shaking inside your gloves. You have made your peace with the sight of death, or something close enough to peace that it functions the same way. But the smell is different. The smell does not become ordinary. You have been told by older detectives, men and women who had worked homicide for 20-30 years, that it eventually does. That one day you walk into a scene and your nose simply registers it and moves on. The way it moves on from coffee or rain or the particular staleness of the precinct break room at midnight. You are not sure you believe them. You are not sure you want to. You stand in the doorway and breathe through your mouth and look. The apartment is small. Third floor of a building that has been slowly losing its argument with gravity for the last 40 years. The kind of place where the hallway carpet is a color that no longer has a name and the elevator has been out of service so long the handwritten sign taped to its doors has yellowed and curled at the corners. The apartment itself is tidy in the way that speaks of habit rather than comfort. Everything in its place. Not the tidiness of someone who had guests or cared about appearances, but the tidiness of someone who needed the external world to reflect a certain order because the internal world did not cooperate. You note this. You note everything. The responding officer, young, standing very carefully with his back to the room, gives you the outline. Called in by a neighbor. Smell through the wall. No signs of forced entry. Victim is a white male, mid-40s, found in the chair facing the window. Has been here by the preliminary estimate between 4 and 6 days. You step inside. The victim is still in the chair. This is the first thing that registers as wrong, not wrong in the ordinary sense, not the wrongness of death itself, but wrong in the specific way that means something to you, that trips something in the part of your mind that has been trained to notice the difference between what is and what should be. People did not die in chairs facing windows. Not like this. Not with their hands in their laps and their posture almost relaxed, the particular arrangement of a body that had been placed rather than fallen. Staged. You do not say this out loud. You never say things out loud at a scene until you have walked the full perimeter, until you have let your eyes move over every surface and your mind has had time to begin assembling what it is seeing into something that resembles a picture. Saying things out loud too early closed doors. It sent your attention in one direction before you had established what directions were available. You walk the perimeter, the kitchen, clean. A single cup in the drying rack beside the sink, washed and left to dry with the handle facing right. The refrigerator contains the food of someone who lived alone and ate without pleasure. The functional minimum, organized with the same compulsive neatness as the rest of the apartment. The window above the sink looks out onto the back alley. It is locked from the inside. The bedroom. The bed is made. Military corners, the kind you learned in institutions, not in homes. On the nightstand. A glass of water, evaporated now to a faint mineral ring. A book, face down, spine carefully uncracked. The bookmark placed with precision at page 47. You look at the title. You look at it for a moment longer than necessary. Back in the main room, you crouch beside the chair and look at the victim's hands. At the arrangement of the fingers. At something on the left wrist that you almost missed, would have missed if you had not been looking at the hands specifically, if you had not developed over 15 years the particular quality of attention that treated every inch of a scene as potentially the inch that mattered. A mark. Small. Deliberate. Not post-mortem. The skin around it tells you that. You stand up slowly. Look at the window the victim was facing. At the view it offered. The street below, the buildings opposite. The ordinary movement of a city that had continued its business for 4 to 6 days without knowing what was sitting in this chair 3 floors above it. You think about the book with the uncracked spine. The military corners on the bed. the single cup in the drying rack. You think about the mark on the wrist. You have been a detective for 15 years. You have worked 114 homicide cases. You have stood in rooms like this more times than you can count without effort. But something is sitting at the back of your skull right now, quiet, not yet fully formed, the way things felt at the beginning when your instincts had registered something your conscious mind had not yet caught up to. You look at the mark on the wrist one more time. Then you take out your phone and call your partner. "You need to come see this," you say. You do not say anything else. You do not need to. 15 years of partnership had built its own compressed language, and the tone of your voice carries everything the words do not. You hang up and stand in the center of the room and wait. Outside, the city continues. Up here, in the particular silence of a place where something has ended, you stay very still and let the room tell you what it knows. It is not finished talking yet. Your partner's name is Reyes. She has been your partner for 6 years, which in homicide is longer than most marriages last and requires a similar quality of sustained tolerance. You know her coffee order, her tells when she is lying to a suspect, the specific silence she produces when she thinks you are wrong but has decided to let you find out yourself. She knows yours. She arrives 22 minutes after your call. You know because you have been standing in the same position since you hung up, your eyes moving over the room in slow circuits, and you have counted the minutes the way you counted everything at a scene, not obsessively but as information. Time was always information. She steps through the door and stops, does what you did, breathes through her mouth, registers the smell, moves past it. Then she looks at the room, at the victim, at you. "Staged," she says. You had not said it out loud. She had walked in and seen it herself in under 10 seconds and said the word you had been holding since you arrived. This was why you had been partners for 6 years. "Look at the wrist," you say. She crosses the room carefully, following the path along the wall that you had established as the approach route, keeping the center of the room clear, preserving the floor between the door and the chair until forensics had documented it. She crouches beside the victim and looks at the wrist. She is quiet for a moment. "What is that?" she says. Not a question exactly. The tone of someone thinking out loud. "I don't know yet." She looks up at you. Deliberate. "Yes." She stands, looks at the window, at the view. Then she does what you did, looks at the arrangement of the room, the tidiness, the specific quality of order that the apartment maintained. Her eyes go to the kitchen doorway, then to the bedroom. "He lived alone," she says. "Yes. For a long time." You nod. The apartment had the feeling of a place that had not had another person in it regularly for years. Not the absence of relationship, something more specific than that. The absence of accommodation. When you lived with other people, you made unconscious adjustments in the placement of things, in the use of space, in the small negotiations that happened between bodies sharing a territory. This apartment had none of that. Every choice in it had been made by one person, for one person, without reference to anyone else. "No forced entry," you say. Reyes looks at the door, at the lock. He let them in. Or they had a key. Or the lock was bypassed so cleanly there's nothing to show for it. She pauses. "Forensics will tell us." You look at the victim's face. Mid-40s, as the responding officer said. But something about the face, the specific quality of its stillness, suggests someone who had been still in life too. Not peaceful. Still in the way of someone who had learned to make themselves small and quiet and unnoticeable, and had been doing it for so long it had become structural. He knew someone was coming, you say. Reyes looks at you. "The chair," you say. "He's facing the window, the street." He wasn't reading, wasn't watching television, wasn't eating. He was sitting in a chair facing the window. You pause. People sit like that when they're waiting. She looks at the chair, at the body, at the angle of the window. You watch her working through it, the specific process you had watched for 6 years, her mind assembling information into structure, testing it, finding where it held and where it didn't. Or someone positioned him that way after, she says. Yes, either way. Either way was the operative condition of early investigation. Every observation existed in a state of uncertainty until something confirmed or denied it. The skill was not certainty, certainty came later, if it came at all. The skill was holding multiple possibilities simultaneously without collapsing them prematurely into one. The forensics team arrives. You and Reyes move to the hallway and let them work, standing against the wall in the narrow corridor while the apartment fills with the specific organized activity of people documenting a scene. The hallway smells of old carpet and something someone had cooked 2 floors down, onions and oil, the smell of ordinary life continuing at close range. Reyes is looking at her phone. Victim's name is Daniel Marsh, 44. Worked in data processing for an insurance company. 8 years at the same company. No criminal record. No next of kin on file. Neighbors. Responding officer spoke to the one who called it in. Woman in 3B. Says she barely knew him. Saw him in the hallway occasionally. He was polite, quiet. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen him before she noticed the smell. Reyes pauses. She said he always looked like he was apologizing for taking up space. You look at the apartment door, at the number on it, at the peephole standard issue, the kind in every door in the building. Pull everything, you say. Employment records, financials, phone. I want to know who the last person was to contact him and when. Already requested. You look at her. You called it in your voice, she says. I started pulling before I got here. You look back at the door. Through it, forensics is moving around the body with their cameras and their kits and their careful documented attention. And somewhere in all of that, in the mark on the wrist and the staged posture and the chair facing the window, is the beginning of something. You do not know yet what it is the beginning of, but you know it is not the end. The mark on the wrist, you say. Okafor moves to the left arm. She has already photographed and documented it. You can see the evidence markers around it, the careful notation in her preliminary report. She indicates it without touching it. Made ante-mortem, at least several hours before death, based on the tissue response. Made with something precise, a fine instrument, not a knife. More like a stylus or a sharp point of consistent width. She looks at you. It is not random. The pressure was controlled. Whoever made it took their time. You look at the mark. You had studied it at the scene, but in the examining room's light it was clearer. A small symbol or the suggestion of one. Not letters, not numbers. Something that existed between those categories. Something that your pattern recognition had been working on since the apartment and had not yet resolved into meaning. Can you photograph it isolated? You say. High resolution. Already done. You look at it for another moment. The controlled pressure. The fine instrument. The time taken. Someone had stood over this man. This quiet man who apologized for taking up space, who lived alone in a tidy apartment with military corners on his bed, and had marked him carefully and deliberately before killing him, or after sedating him, or both in some sequence you had not yet established. The mark was not incidental. The mark was the point. Outside the examining room, Reyes is already on her phone. You stand in the corridor and think. This was the part of the process that looked like nothing from the outside. Standing still, not speaking, not visibly doing anything. But this was in fact where most of the work happened. The scene, the body, the preliminary facts. All of it was sitting in your mind now, and your mind was doing what it did, which was turning it over and over in the dark looking for the shape of it. Staged body. No forced entry. No struggle. Controlled mark made with precision and time. The medical examiner's name is Dr. Okafor, and she does not speculate. This is the first thing you learned about her when you started working with her 3 years ago, and it is the thing you respect most. In a job where everyone had theories, where theories were in fact the primary currency, the thing that got traded across desks and in hallways and in the particular low-voice conversations that happened at the edges of crime scenes, Okafor dealt only in what she could demonstrate. She would tell you what the body said. She would not tell you what she thought it meant. You are standing in the examining room when she begins. Reyes is beside you. The room is cold and bright and smells of the specific combination of chemicals that you had long ago stopped noticing except as a signal that you were here, in this room, about to learn something. Okafor works without narrating. She moves around the body with the economy of someone who has done this thousands of times and has reduced every motion to its necessary minimum. You watch her hands. Her hands were where the information was. After 20 minutes, she looks up. Cause of death is asphyxiation, she says. Manual strangulation. The bruising pattern on the neck is consistent with hands, large hands, significant grip strength. Whoever did this was physically capable and not hesitant. She pauses. There was no struggle. You look at the body, at the hands, which you had noted at the scene, the specific arrangement of the fingers, too composed for someone who had fought back. Sedated, Reyes asks. Toxicology will confirm, but the absence of defensive wounds combined with the bruising pattern suggests the victim was either unconscious or incapacitated when it happened. There is no skin under the fingernails, no bruising on the hands or forearms. Okafor looks at the body with the expression she always wore, not detached exactly, but precise, focused on what was there rather than what it meant. He did not fight. Victim who let someone in or whose lock was bypassed. A man who lived alone and had for years. Reyes ends her call and comes to stand beside you. Financials are coming in, she says. Nothing obvious yet. Regular deposits, regular withdrawals. Nothing that suggests debt or conflict or anyone with a financial interest in his death. She pauses. But there's something else. You look at her. I ran the mark, she says. The image from the scene photos. Ran it against known gang symbols, prison tattoo databases, occult symbol registries. She pauses again, the specific pause she used when she had found something and was deciding how to present it. Nothing came back. Nothing. No matches. No partial matches. Whatever it is, it's not in any database we have access to. She looks at you, which means either it's genuinely new, or it's too obscure to have been cataloged, or it was invented, you say. She nods slowly. Personal. Specific. Made for this. You look at the examining room door, at the body on the other side of it. A mark that existed in no database. Made with precision and time on a man who did not struggle. Left like a signature. Or a message. The question was not whether it was intentional. Everything about this was intentional. The question was who the message was for. You look at Reyes. Pull missing persons, you say. Last 18 months. Any open homicides with unusual postmortem or antemortem marks on the body. Any cases that felt staged and didn't resolve. Reyes is already typing. How wide a radius? You think about the apartment, the tidiness, the chair facing the window, the quality of patience embedded in every detail of the scene. Start national, you say. Reyes stops typing for a moment, looks at you. Yes, you say. That's what I think. She goes back to typing without another word. The results come back at 11 p.m. You are at your desk when they do. The bullpen empty except for you and Reyes and the particular quality of silence that a police department produced after midnight, when the day shift noise had drained out and left behind only the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the city through windows that had not been opened in years. Reyes pulls her chair to your desk and sets her laptop between you. There are 7 cases. Not 7 possibilities. Not 7 maybes. 7 cases across 4 states over the past 14 months that share enough with what you found in Daniel Marsh's apartment that the coincidence would require more faith in randomness than either of you possess. You go through them one by one. The first is from Portland. 11 months ago. A woman, 51, found in her apartment by a coworker after 3 days. Staged, seated at her kitchen table with her hands folded. No forced entry. No struggle. Toxicology confirmed sedation. And on the inside of her right ankle, documented in the forensics photographs and noted in the file as unknown origin, a small precise mark made with a fine instrument. The detective on the case had noted it, had run it, had found nothing and moved on, because cases moved and pressure accumulated, and an unidentified mark on a victim's ankle was one data point among many, and the case had other directions to follow. It had gone cold 8 months ago. The second case is from Minneapolis. 9 months ago, male 38, found in his car in a parking garage, which seemed different until you read further, the positioning of the body, the staging, the absence of defensive wounds, and there, in the forensics report, a mark on the back of the left hand. Same controlled pressure, same fine instrument, different symbol, different symbol. You stop on this. They're not the same, Reyes says. She has seen it too.
No.
You look at the Portland mark and the Minneapolis mark side by side on the screen. They are not identical. They share a quality, the precision, the deliberateness, the sense of something made rather than inflicted, but they are distinct. Different shapes, different locations on the body. Each one is different, you say. Reyes pulls up the other 5 cases and you go through them quickly, checking the marks. She is right. 7 victims, 7 marks, none of them the same. You sit back in your chair. A signature that changed. That was not how signatures worked. Signatures were consistent, were the point of consistency, were the thing that said I was here in a way that could be recognized across cases and time. A signature that changed was either not a signature or was something more complicated than a signature. A system, maybe. What if they're not random variations, you say? What if they're sequential? Reyes looks at you. What if each mark means something specific, you say? Not the same thing repeated. A series. Each one different because each one is a different. You pause, working it out as you speak. A different entry, a different number, a different word. Reyes is quiet for a moment. Then she pulls the 7 case files and lines up the marks in chronological order. Portland first, then Minneapolis, then the 5 others arranged by date. You look at them in sequence. Your mind does the thing it did, turns them over, looks for the shape, tries the pattern against everything it knows about systems and sequences and the way human beings encoded meaning when they wanted it to be found but not immediately understood. Nothing resolves. Not yet. But something shifts slightly, the way things shifted when you were close to the edge of something without being able to see over it. We need someone who works in symbols, you say. Cryptography, linguistics, semiotics. Someone who looks at these and sees what we don't. I know someone at the university, Reyes says. She consults occasionally. She's good. Call her in the morning. Reyes nods. She is looking at the chronological sequence of marks on her screen with the expression she wore when something was bothering her. Not the bothered of confusion, but the bothered of someone who had noticed something and was not yet sure if it was real. What? You say. The timeline, she says. Look at the dates. You look. Portland. Then Minneapolis 43 days later. Then the next case 39 days after that. Then 36. Then 34. Then 31. Then Daniel Marsh, 28 days after the previous victim. The intervals were shrinking, not randomly, not chaotically, shrinking by approximately 3 days each time, with the consistency of something calculated rather than felt. The consistency of someone working to a schedule and adjusting the schedule deliberately. Accelerating. You look at the last date. Daniel Marsh, found 4 to 6 days ago, 28 days after the previous victim, which meant, if the pattern held, the next one was in approximately 25 days. 25 days, minus however many had already passed since Marsh. You look at the clock on the wall, at the date display in the corner of Reyes's screen. We have maybe 3 weeks, you say. Reyes closes her laptop slowly, looks at you with the expression that meant she had arrived at the same place and did not like it there. Then we should sleep, she says, because tomorrow is going to be long. You look at the closed laptop. at the 7 marks arranged in sequence behind it, in your memory now, the way everything ended up, stored and turning, waiting to become something you understood. 25 days. You stand up, put on your coat, walk to the elevator. In the elevator going down, you think about the acceleration, about the shrinking intervals, about whatever logic was governing the schedule and pulling it tighter with each iteration. Someone was working towards something. You did not know what, but the clock was already running. Dr. Sarah Chun does not look like someone who spent her days decoding the hidden languages of human beings. She looks like someone who had not slept enough and had given up apologizing for it. Dark circles worn with the confidence of a person who had decided that sleep was a negotiation and she was consistently losing it. She arrives at the precinct at 8 in the morning with a coffee that was already half empty and a bag that contained, as far as you could tell, approximately half a library. She looks at the 7 marks for a long time without speaking. You had printed them, high resolution, arranged chronologically on a single sheet, each one labeled with its case number and date. You had also printed them individually larger so the details were visible. You had laid all of this out on the conference table before she arrived, and you had watched her walk in and stop and look at the table with the specific quality of attention that meant she was already working. She sets down her coffee, sits, pulls the chronological sheet toward her. Reyes is leaning against the wall to your left. You are seated across from Chun. Nobody speaks. 5 minutes pass. Then Chun says, without looking up, "Where did you find these?" "Crime scenes," you say. 7 victims over 14 months.
Marked ante-mortem.
All ante-mortem? All confirmed ante-mortem, yes. She looks up at that. Something has shifted in her expression. The academic attention replaced by something more personal, more alert. Made with a consistent instrument? Consistent type of instrument. Fine point, controlled pressure. Possibly different physical instruments, but the same technique. She looks back at the sheet. "They're not decorative," she says. "And they're not random. You already know that, or you wouldn't be here. We think they're sequential," Reyes says. "A series." Chun looks at the marks in chronological order for another long moment. Then she does something you had not expected. She takes the sheet and turns it 90 degrees, looks at it, then turns it again. "You're looking at them as symbols," she says. "Discrete units of meaning. That might be the wrong frame. What's the right frame?" She turns the sheet back to its original orientation. What if they're not symbols in the conventional sense? Not things that mean something the way a letter or a word means something. She pauses. What if they're notations? You look at her. "A notation system is different from a symbolic system," she says. "Symbols carry fixed meaning. You look them up, you find the referent, you know what they mean. Notation's record process. Music notation doesn't mean anything in isolation. It tells you what to do. Mathematical notation tells you what operation to perform." She looks at the marks. These have the quality of notations. They're not trying to communicate a meaning. They're recording something. "Recording what?" Reyes says. Chun is quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet, but look at the progression." She points to the first mark, Portland, and moves her finger along the sequence. "There's a development here. Each one is more complex than the last. Not dramatically, subtly. An additional element here. A modification there. Like a system being refined." You look at the sequence with that frame and something shifts. She was right. The first mark was simpler. Each subsequent mark carried something the previous one did not. An addition, a variation, a layer that had not been there before. A system being refined. "How long would it take you to work out what it's recording?" you say. "I don't know. I need to work with the originals, the forensic photographs, the highest resolution you have. And I need to know everything about the victims. Not just the marks. The victims. Why the victims?" Chun looks at you with the expression of someone choosing how much to explain. "Because notation systems are created for a purpose. They record something specific. And the something specific here is presumably related to what was done to these people. She pauses. The marks aren't incidental to the crimes. I think the crimes are incidental to the marks. The room is quiet for a moment. You let that sit. Turn it over. The crimes are incidental to the marks. 7 people were dead, sedated and strangled and staged in apartments and cars and wherever the other 5 had been found. And this woman, who decoded the hidden languages of human beings for a living, was telling you that the deaths were not the point, that something else was being recorded, built, accumulated. What is being built? Reyes says. Her voice is careful. I don't know yet, Chen says. But the acceleration you mentioned, the shrinking intervals. She looks at the dates. That's not impatience. That's not someone losing control or becoming compulsive. That's a deadline. A deadline for what? She looks at you. Whatever the notation is counting toward. Whatever the system is building to. She looks back at the marks. The last entry always looks different from the ones that came before it. In any notation system, musical, mathematical, any system with a terminal point, the final entry resolves something, closes something. She is quiet for a moment. Whatever this is, it isn't finished. You look at the marks on the table. 8 victims so far. A deadline approaching. A system that was not finished. Someone was writing something in the bodies of the dead, and they were close to the last page. The 8th victim turns up before you find the 9th. You are in the conference room with Chen's preliminary notes spread across the table when Reyes's phone rings. She looks at the screen, looks at you, answers it and listens without speaking for 40 seconds and then says thank you and hangs up. Detroit, she says. Last night. Found this morning. You look at the calendar on the wall. Count back from Daniel Marsh. 22 days. Not 25. The intervals were shrinking faster than the pattern had suggested. You are on a flight to Detroit by noon. The Detroit scene is a house rather than an apartment. A small single story on a street of small single stories. The kind of neighborhood that had been declining for so long that the decline had become its permanent condition rather than a direction of travel. The victim is a woman this time. 63. Retired schoolteacher. Found by her daughter who had come by when calls went unanswered for 2 days. Her name was Margaret Ellison, and she had taught 4th grade for 31 years and had 3 grandchildren whose photographs covered the refrigerator in the kitchen where you stood and looked at them while Reyes talked to the local detective who had caught the case. The staging here was different from Marsh. Not seated, lying. On the living room floor, on her back, arms at her sides, with the specific composed quality that you now recognized immediately and completely, the arrangement that no body achieved through the natural mechanics of dying. The mark was on her collarbone, visible above the neckline of her shirt. You crouched and looked at it without touching. More complex than the previous 7. Chun had been right about the progression. Each mark carried something the last one did not, and this one was noticeably more elaborate than Marsh's. More elements, more layers. The work of someone who was moving through a sequence and knew exactly where they were in it. The local detective's name was Carver. He was 60, had the look of someone who had seen enough that very little surprised him anymore, and he looked at you and Reyes with the particular expression of a detective who had been told that federal interest was being taken in his case and had not decided yet how he felt about that. Same as the others? He said. Consistent with the others, yes. How many others? 7 confirmed. Possibly more we haven't connected yet. Carver looked at the body, at the mark. My victim, he said, not aggressively, just establishing. Your victim, you said. We're here for information sharing. Whatever we have is yours. He looked at you for a moment, then nodded once, the nod of a man accepting terms he considered fair. No forced entry, he said. Daughter confirms the mother was careful about that. Locks, chain, the works. Lived alone since the husband died 4 years ago. Daughter says she didn't have many visitors. Maybe 1 or 2 people she'd let in without question. Any names? Working on it. He paused. Toxicology won't be back for days, but the ME's preliminary is consistent with sedation.
No struggle.
Nothing under the fingernails. He stopped, looked at the photographs on the refrigerator. She was arranged. After. Yes. Why? He said, not asking you specifically, asking the room, asking the situation. The why that detectives asked not because they expected an immediate answer, but because keeping the question audible kept you honest about how much you did not yet know. You did not answer it. You looked at the mark on Margaret Ellison's collarbone and thought about what Chun had said. The crimes are incidental to the marks. This woman had taught children to read for 31 years. She had grandchildren whose drawings were held to her refrigerator with small colored magnets. She had been careful about her locks and had let someone in anyway and had died without struggling and had been arranged on her own living room floor with a mark on her collarbone that was one step further along in a sequence that was building towards something. Incidental. The word sat badly. It always would. But you had learned over 15 years that your discomfort with a framing was not evidence against the framing. Sometimes the thing that sat badly was true anyway. On the flight back, Reyes was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We're behind." "Yes. We have a system we don't understand. A timeline that's accelerating faster than projected. And no suspect profile that means anything yet." "Yes. Chun needs more time than we have." "Yes." Reyes looked out the window at the dark below. The lights of whatever city was passing underneath you. "There's something else," she said. "You waited." "I've been looking at the victims," she said. "All 8, trying to find the connection. Something that explains the selection, why these 8 people, why in this order." She paused. "On the surface, there's nothing. Different ages, different genders, different cities, different occupations. No shared employer, no shared institution, no obvious social overlap. But," you said, "but I went deeper, further back." She turned from the window. All 8 of them were in the foster care system as children. The plane moved through the dark. "All 8, you said. Different states, different decades, different facilities. But all 8 spent time in foster care before the age of 16. She paused. "I don't think that's coincidence." You looked at the seat back in front of you. Foster care. Different states, different decades, different facilities. But the same system. The same vast imperfect system that moved children through it like water through pipes. And sometimes the pipes were clean and sometimes they were not. And what happened inside them was not always visible from the outside and was not always recorded and was not always remembered by anyone except the children themselves, who grew up and lived alone in tidy apartments and apologized for taking up space and let someone in. "Someone knows what happened to them," you said. "Yes," Reyes said. "The question is whether that someone is a victim too." Chun calls you at 6 in the morning. You are awake. You had not slept more than 2 hours. Not from the effort of staying awake, but from the inability to stop turning the pieces over, the way the mind refused to release certain problems even when the body had run out of resources to give them. You were lying on your couch with your shoes still on when the phone rang and you answered it before the second ring. "I have something," she said. "Come in." She had been in the conference room all night. You could tell from the specific quality of disorder that had accumulated around her. The coffee cups, the printed pages covered in handwritten notes, the laptop with 3 separate windows open and a 4th minimized at the bottom of the screen. She had the look of someone who had passed through exhaustion and arrived somewhere on the other side of it, running on whatever the mind produced when it had committed completely to a problem and refused to release it. She had printed the 8 marks again, arranged them chronologically on the table. But she had also done something else. Beside each mark she had placed a photograph of the corresponding victim. 8 marks, 8 faces. You looked at the faces for a moment before you looked at anything else. Margaret Ellison, Daniel Marsh, the 6 others. Different ages, different faces, the specific variety of ordinary human appearance that made up most of the world. Nothing that connected them visually. Nothing that would have placed them in the same room or the same story if you had seen their photographs without context. But they were in the same story. Had been in it, you now understood, since childhood. The notation system, Chun said. She did not say good morning. She pointed at the marks. I was wrong about one thing. They're not purely notations, they're a hybrid. Part notation, part memorial. Memorial, Reyes said. She had arrived 2 minutes after you, equally unslept. Each mark has 2 components. Chun pointed to the first mark, Portland. This element here, the base structure, is consistent across all 8. Modified, developed, but the same underlying architecture. That's the notation component. It's recording something cumulative, something that builds with each iteration. She moved her finger to a second element within the same mark. But this part is different. This part is specific to the individual victim. I didn't see it at first because I was looking at the marks as unified symbols. When I separated the components, it became clear. You looked at the Portland mark with that frame. She was right, there were 2 distinct elements, integrated but separable. Like a sentence with a fixed grammatical structure and a variable subject. What does the individual component record? You said. Chun sat down, looked at the photograph of the Portland victim beside her mark. I think it records what happened to them, specifically, in the system. She paused. I've been cross-referencing with what you told me about the foster care connection, and I think each mark is a specific record of a specific harm. Not generic, not symbolic in the loose sense, precise. She looked at you. Whoever is making these marks knew these victims, knew what happened to them personally, not from a file. The room was quiet, knew what happened to them personally. A survivor, Reyes said. Someone who was there, Chun said, in the same facilities or overlapping facilities during the same periods. Someone who witnessed what happened to these people or experienced something parallel. She paused. The notation component, the cumulative element, I think it's a count. I think it's recording a number. And each new mark advances the count by 1. A count toward what? You said. Toward a total. She looked at the 8 marks in sequence. I think there's a predetermined number. A final entry. And when that entry is made, the notation will be complete. How many? Reyes said. How many total? Chun looked at the progression. At the development of the cumulative element across the 8 marks. Based on the rate of development and the complexity I'd expect at completion. She paused. I think the total is 12. 12. 8 down. For remaining, you looked at the accelerating timeline. 22 days between the 7th and 8th victims. Shrinking by approximately 3 days each interval. 19 days to the next one, Reyes said. She had done the same calculation. Approximately, you said, if the pattern holds exactly. But it's not holding exactly anymore. No, she said. It's not. You looked at the 8 faces on the table. At the 12 implied by the notation system. At the 4 people who did not yet know, could not know, that they were next in a sequence someone had been building for 14 months. We need the full list, you said. Every child who passed through the same facilities as these 8 victims during the relevant periods. Every name in every file. That's thousands of records across multiple states, Reyes said. Yes. Some of those records won't exist anymore. Lost, destroyed, never properly documented. Yes. It could take weeks to compile. You looked at the timeline, at the shrinking intervals, at the 4 remaining spaces in a sequence that was moving faster than it had been. Then we start now, you said. Reyes was already on the phone. You looked at Chun. She was looking at the 8 marks with an expression you recognized. Not the academic attention of someone analyzing a system, but something more personal. The expression of someone who had spent the night inside something dark and had come to understand it well enough that understanding it had cost something. The person who made these, you said quietly, What do you think happened to them? Chun looked at the marks for a long moment. Something that didn't get recorded, she said. Something that should have been and wasn't. She paused. Something they've been carrying alone for a very long time. You looked at the faces on the table. 8 people who had carried something alone. And somewhere out there, a 9th person carrying the same weight but carrying it differently. Carrying it forward. Toward a number they had chosen before any of this began. 12. For left. The clock was not slowing down. The records take 4 days to begin arriving. 4 days of phone calls and formal requests and the particular friction of bureaucracies that had not been designed to communicate with each other, state agencies, county offices, private facilities that had since closed, archives that existed in physical form only in basement storage rooms in buildings that were no longer used for their original purpose. Reyes managed most of it with the systematic patience of someone who understood that the obstacle was not malice but entropy, the natural tendency of information to scatter and degrade over time, and that the only answer to entropy was persistence. You spent those 4 days on the victims. Not the files, you had the files. You spent them on the people behind the files. The daughters and co-workers and neighbors who had known them. The specific texture of 8 lives that had each begun in the same vast imperfect system and had each ended in the same staged stillness. What emerged was not a pattern in the obvious sense. Not a shared personality or a shared profession or a shared set of choices that connected them visually across time. What emerged was subtler than that. A shared quality of absence. Each of them had lived at a slight remove from the world around them. Not unhappy exactly, not visibly damaged in any way that would have been noticed or named, but contained, careful, moving through their lives with the particular economy of people who had learned early that the world was not reliably safe and had organized themselves accordingly. They had survived. That was the thing. They had all survived whatever the system had done or failed to do, and they had built lives, and those lives had had value and texture and the small, ordinary dignities of people who had kept going. And someone had found them anyway. On the 4th day, Chin calls. The individual components, she says. The victim-specific elements of each mark. I've been working on them separately from the notation structure, and I think I know what they are. You are in your car outside a coffee shop. You stay in the car. Their names, she says. Not the victims' names. Other names. People who were present in those facilities. People who had authority over the children in their care. She pauses. I think each mark records the name of a specific person who harmed a specific victim. In a system that was designed to look like a notation, to look like something other than what it is, but is actually a list. A list. A list of people who were never held accountable, you say. That's my interpretation, yes? You look through the windshield at the street, at the ordinary morning movement of people who did not know about the list or the marks or the 12 spaces in a sequence that was filling itself one body at a time. Can you identify the names? You say. Some of them, possibly. With the victim records as a reference, if I know which facility, which period, which specific harm, I might be able to match the notation to a name in the records. She pauses. But the records are incomplete, and some of the names may not be in any record at all. Work with what you have, you say. Any name you can identify is a name we can investigate. There's something else, she says. You wait. The person who designed this system, who created the notation, who made these marks, they had help. Not in the killings, I don't think, but in the design. The system is too sophisticated, too internally consistent, for someone without formal training in symbolic logic or linguistics. She pauses. Someone taught them this, or they taught themselves, which would have taken years, possibly decades. Decades. You think about the timeline, 14 months of killings. But the preparation, the creation of the system, the identification of the victims, the planning of the sequence, that had started long before the first body. How long had someone been building this before they began? Back at the precinct, Reyes meets you at the elevator with the expression that meant the records had produced something. I have a name, she says. You follow her to the conference room. She has a file open on the table, a physical file, photocopied from original documents, the paper slightly warped from whatever storage condition it had spent the last 30 years in. Cross-referencing the 8 victims' facility records, she says, looking for overlap, any individual who appears in the records of more than one facility during the relevant periods. She points to a name on the page. This person appears in the records of 6 of the 8 facilities. Staff member, different roles in different facilities, aide, supervisor, administrator. Moved around a lot. She pauses. Never flagged. Never investigated. Retired 11 years ago. You look at the name. Then you look at the dates. The facilities. The roles. Someone who had moved through the system for decades, accumulating authority, leaving no official record of harm. Clean files. Good references. The institutional invisibility of a person who understood how to be useful enough to be kept and careful enough never to be examined. Where are they now, you say? That's the thing, Reyes says. She looks at you with the expression she wore when the information was not what either of you wanted it to be. I ran them this morning. And they died 8 months ago, she says. Natural causes. 3 months before the killings started. The conference room is quiet. You look at the name on the page, at the 6 facilities, at the decades of careful, invisible movement through a system full of children. Dead 8 months ago. 3 months before someone began marking the bodies of survivors. They found out too late, you say. Or someone found out and couldn't get to them in time, Reyes says quietly. You look at the file, at the name that would never face what it had done, at the clean record and the good references and the quiet retirement and the natural death that had arrived before any accounting could. And you thought about someone who had known, who had been building a system for years, maybe decades, preparing to record what had never been recorded, to name what had never been named, and had watched the person they had built it for die before the first mark was ever made. What did you do with that? Where did that go? You looked at the 8 faces on the table. Maybe you kept going anyway. Maybe the list was still the list, regardless of whether the person at the top of it was still alive to be held to it. Maybe you marked the ones who had survived them instead. You looked at Reyes. We need to find the 9th victim before they do, you say. We have a partial list from the records, she says. 43 names. Survivors from the same facilities during the same periods. We've been cross-referencing against current addresses. She pauses. 12 of them are uncontactable. Could be nothing. Could be unlisted numbers, relocation, any number of things. Or could be one of the 4, you say. Yes, 12 uncontactable names. For remaining spaces in the sequence. A timeline that was shrinking toward the next one. Start with the 12, you say. Physical welfare checks. All of them. Today. Reyes was already moving. You stayed at the table for a moment longer. Looked at the file with the name that would never answer for itself. At the 8 faces. At the marks that had recorded in a private language what the official language had never said. Someone had tried to make a record that could not be lost or buried or quietly retired. You understood the impulse. You did not agree with the method. Those 2 things could both be true simultaneously, and you had learned over 15 years that holding them both without resolving them into one was sometimes the most honest thing you could do. You closed the file. For left. You went to find them. The first welfare check comes back clean. Then the second. Then the 3rd through 7th. All located, all alive. All confused and frightened by the uniformed officers appearing at their doors and asking careful questions that did not fully explain themselves. You had instructed the officers to say as little as possible. Not because you wanted to withhold information from people who had a right to know they might be in danger, but because the information itself was a variable. If word got out that someone was hunting survivors of specific facilities, the person you were looking for would know you had mapped the system, would adjust, would accelerate beyond any interval you could predict. The 8th check comes back clean. The 9th does not come back at all. The officer assigned to the address in Cincinnati calls in at 2 in the afternoon. No answer at the door. Neighbor confirms the resident. A man named Paul Whitfield, 57, had not been seen in approximately 4 days. Car still in the driveway. Mail accumulating. You are in Cincinnati by 6. The door is unlocked. Not forced. Not damaged. Simply unlocked. The latch not fully engaged. The door swinging inward at the touch of a gloved hand with the quiet ease of something that had been left that way deliberately or had been manipulated to appear that way. You and Reyes stand in the doorway for a moment. Behind you, 2 local officers wait on the small porch. You go in. Paul Whitfield is in the bedroom. Not staged this time. This is the first thing that registers, the absence of the staging, the body not arranged with the composed, deliberate stillness of the previous 8. He is on the floor beside the bed, on his side, one arm extended. The position of someone who fell. You crouch beside him. Look at his neck, at his wrist, at the back of his hand. No mark. You look at Reyes. No mark, she says. She has seen it too. You stand. Look around the room. At the bed, which is disturbed. Not dramatically, but the sheets pulled back unevenly, the pillow displaced. At the nightstand, where a glass of water has been knocked over and dried, leaving a faint ring on the wood. At the window, which is open 2 inches. Something happened here that did not follow the pattern. He fought, Reyes says. You look at Whitfield's hands, at the knuckles, at the faint bruising on the forearms that was visible even now. He wasn't sedated, you say, or the sedation didn't take fully, or there wasn't time. Something went wrong, Reyes says. You look at the open window, at the 2 inches of gray evening light showing through it, at the screen which is intact, not cut, not removed. They left, you say, before they finished. The room is quiet for a moment. Before they finished meant Paul Whitfield had interrupted something. Had come back to consciousness, or had not gone under fully, or had made enough of a fight that continuing had become untenable. Had forced an abort. Which meant somewhere in this room or on Paul Whitfield's body there might be something that had not been left at any of the previous 8 scenes. Evidence of interruption. You go through the room with the forensics team for 3 hours. Every surface, every fiber, every invisible transfer of material between one body and another that a struggle produced. You are methodical and you are thorough, and at the end of it you have 3 things. A partial shoe print on the bathroom tile, small, narrow, the tread of someone light on their feet. A single dark hair on the bedroom carpet, long, caught under the edge of the bed frame. And on the inside of the bedroom door, at approximately shoulder height, for parallel marks in the paint. The specific mark of fingernails dragged across a surface. Not Whitfield's, the angle was wrong, and Whitfield's nails were short, bitten down. Someone else's hand. Someone who had been moving fast and had caught the door frame in passing. Someone who had been in a hurry to leave. You stood and looked at the 4 marks in the paint for a long time. 8 scenes with no physical evidence. Perfect control, perfect execution. Nothing left behind. And then this, a shoe print, a hair, for lines in paint. The specific debris of a plan that had not gone the way it was supposed to. Paul Whitfield was alive. Unconscious, injured, en route to a hospital, but alive. The first survivor of a sequence that had not intended to produce survivors. In the car outside, Reyes said, "They'll know we're close." Yes, the evidence they left. They'll know what it means. That we have something now. Yes, it changes the timeline. You looked at the hospital where the ambulance had taken Whitfield, at the lit windows of it against the darkening sky. It changes everything, you said. They have 3 remaining marks to make. They know we're mapping the survivor pool. They know this scene was compromised. You paused. They'll move faster, much faster. The intervals we calculated are meaningless now. How fast? Reyes said. You thought about it. About the dedication embedded in 14 months of preparation and execution. About the system built over possibly decades. About the moment of interrupted purpose, the mark not made, the sequence broken, the careful plan producing its first failure. If I had been building this for 20 years, you said slowly, and someone interrupted it at the 9th out of 12, you stopped. Reyes was looking at you. I wouldn't wait, you said. I would move immediately. Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow at the latest. The car was quiet. Then we have hours, Reyes said. Maybe. She started the car. You looked at your phone. At the list of remaining uncontactable names. 3 left after Whitfield. 3 people somewhere in the country who did not know that the sequence had broken and was now running unconstrained toward them. 3 names. Ours. You called Chen. She answered on the first ring. She had been waiting. The individual components, you said. The victim-specific elements. How many have you identified? 6 of the 8, she said. 6 names. People who worked in those facilities. I need the remaining marks, you said. The ones that haven't been made yet. If the system is as consistent as you think, if each mark records a specific harm to a specific victim, can you predict what the next 3 marks will contain? Can you work backward from the system to identify who the next 3 victims are? Silence on the line. That's not how notation systems work, she said slowly. You can't predict future entries from past ones unless... She stopped. Unless what? You said. Unless the total set is already determined, she said. Unless whoever designed the system knew all 12 entries before they made the first one. She paused. Which they would have, if they knew all 12 victims from the beginning. Can you do it? You said. Another silence. Longer this time. Give me 2 hours, she said. You looked at Reyes. At the dark road ahead of you. At the 3 names on your phone screen. 3 people somewhere in the country, going about whatever remained of their evening. Unaware. You have 1, you said. Chun calls back in 53 minutes. You are still in the car, still moving, the highway lights strobing through the windshield in a rhythm that had become hypnotic over the last 2 hours. Reyes is driving. You have the 3 remaining names on your phone, and you have been staring at them long enough that they have stopped looking like names and started looking like an equation you could not solve. Chen's voice when she answers is different from how it had been. Not the academic precision of someone analyzing a system. Something rawer than that. Something that told you she had spent the last 53 minutes inside something that had cost her. I have them, she says. All 3. She gives you the names. 2 of them are on your list of uncontactable survivors. The 3rd is not, had been missed in the initial cross-referencing. A clerical error in a decades-old file that had placed her in the wrong facility record. A misattribution of 2 digits in a case number that had put her name in a folder where it did not belong and kept it invisible until Chen's system found her anyway. Her name is Ruth Carey, 71 years old, living alone in a small house outside Columbus, Ohio. Reyes is already recalculating the route before you finish the sentence. You call ahead. Local police, welfare check, urgent, the specific language that moved things faster without explaining everything. You stay on the line with the dispatcher while Reyes drives, and the highway becomes a state road, becomes a county road, becomes the specific darkness of rural Ohio at 10 at night. The kind of dark that had no ambient light in it, just the tunnel of your headlights and the shapes of trees on either side. The local officer reaches Ruth Carey's house 12 minutes before you do. He calls it in 4 minutes after that. You hear it in the dispatcher's voice before the words arrive. That particular quality of controlled urgency that meant something had already happened and the thing you had been racing toward had not waited for you. Reyes accelerates. The house is small and white and has a porch light on and 2 police cars in the driveway and the front door standing open when you pull up. You are out of the car before it fully stops. The local officer meets you at the porch. Young. Holding himself with the careful composure of someone managing something that had arrived faster than expected. She's alive, he says. You stop. She's alive, he says again. Shaken, not physically harmed. We got here. He pauses. Someone was in the house. Rear window, ground floor. Ruth Carey heard them coming in and locked herself in the bathroom and called 911. He looks at you. When we entered, we found the rear bedroom prepared, the way you described. A chair positioned facing the window. Ready. The room had been made ready, and the victim had heard it happening and had done the one thing that 8 people before her had not had the chance to do. She had hidden. You went inside. Ruth Carey was sitting at her kitchen table with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea she was not drinking in front of her. 71 years old, small, white-haired, with the specific upright posture of someone who had spent a lifetime making themselves take up exactly the right amount of space. Not too much, not too little. The posture of a person who had learned that balance very young and had never stopped performing it. She looked at you when you sat down across from her. You know what this is about, you said. Not a question. She looked at her tea. I've been waiting, she said, for a long time, for someone to come about what happened in those places. She paused. I didn't expect it to be this. You looked at her, at the 71 years in her face, at whatever was sitting behind her eyes. Not fear exactly. Not anymore. Something older than fear. The specific exhaustion of someone who had carried a weight so long they had stopped noticing it as a separate thing and had simply become it. We found them, Reyes said from the doorway. Her voice was quiet. In the backyard. They didn't run. He was sitting on the ground with his back against the rear fence when you came out. Not young. Not what the profile had suggested. Not the profile anyone had suggested, including you. Mid-50s, slight, with the kind of face that would be forgotten in a crowd of 3 people. He was sitting very still with his hands in plain sight on his knees, and he was looking at the ground in front of him with the expression of someone who had arrived at the end of a very long road and found it ending here, in a backyard in Ohio, and had made his peace with that. You stood in front of him. Reyes was 2 steps behind you and to the right. The local officers were at the corners of the yard. He looked up at you. His eyes were the thing you would remember. Not empty, full. Full in the way of someone who had been carrying too much for too long and had organized everything around the carrying of it and had no structure left for anything else. The eyes of a person for whom the world had narrowed, over decades, to a single purpose, and who was now on the other side of that purpose without a self that knew what to do next. How many of them are left? He said. His voice was quiet, conversational almost. The people in the marks, you said. The ones who were never held accountable. He looked at you steadily. Most of them, he said. Most of them are still out there. Old now. Comfortable. He paused. The one I built it for died before I could. He stopped. Looked at the ground again. I kept going anyway. I didn't know what else to do with it. The yard was quiet. Somewhere inside the house, Ruth Carey was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she was not drinking, 71 years old, having survived the thing that had come for her tonight the way she had survived everything else, by finding the small locked room inside herself and staying there until the danger passed. You thought about the 8 faces on the conference table, about the quiet lives built on difficult foundations, about Daniel Marsh sitting in his chair facing the window, waiting, about Margaret Ellison's grandchildren on the refrigerator. You thought about what Chin had said. The crimes are incidental to the marks. Looking at the man on the ground, you were not sure that was true anymore. You were not sure it had ever been entirely true. The marks were real. The need to record what had never been recorded was real. But the people were not incidental. They had never been incidental to anyone who had looked at them as people rather than entries in a system. That was the thing about systems. They made incidental what should never have been. You crouched down to his level. Tell me their names, you said quietly. The ones in the marks. All of them. Every name you recorded. You paused. Let us do what you couldn't. He looked at you for a long moment. Then he started talking. He talked for a long time. In the backyard in Ohio with the night around you and the porch light throwing a yellow rectangle across the grass. Names and places and dates and the specific details of things that had happened in facilities that were supposed to be safe and had not been, recorded in the memory of a man who had spent decades carrying them because no official record had and someone had to. You listened to all of it. You wrote down every name. Some of them would lead nowhere, the dead, the disappeared, the ones who had already escaped accountability through the ordinary mechanism of time. But some of them would not. Some of them were still out there, old and comfortable, living in the quiet assurance of people who had never been found. They would be found now. Not the way he had intended. Not marked. Not staged in arranged rooms in the specific private language of a grief that had no other outlet. But found. You stood up eventually. The night was cold. Behind you Reyes was on the phone, her voice low and steady, setting things in motion. You looked up at the sky above the Ohio backyard. At the ordinary dark of it, the stars doing what stars did, indifferent, permanent, present whether or not anyone was looking. 8 people were dead. One man had carried an impossible weight for decades and had made the worst possible choice with it and would now face what that choice meant. And somewhere in the names he had given you, written in your notebook in the cold of a backyard at midnight, were people who had not yet faced anything at all. That was tomorrow's work. You put your notebook in your pocket. You went back inside.